Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go. Hi.
Hey.
It's not a very motivating day. I gotta be honest.
It hasn't started raining yet, but it's about to pour, and it just has that energy, so it feels like a good napping day. But instead, we're going to talk to you.
I'm sorry that I might upset you by telling you that I might rather be taking a nap right now, but
I think they'll understand.
I'm sorry. It's also introvert problems, so, which is funny because I'm not actually talking to anyone right now. I'm just sitting in a room talking to you, but I don't know. Having to talk to people, can just be draining sometimes.
I know. It's the way we do it is the most introverted way possible.
Even then. I'm sorry. I'm just keeping it real. I just don't want you to think that, like, every time you see people online or on videos or whatever, that they're like, oh my God, my life is perfect. I'm so happy to be here. I'm like, I'm all right. I'm mediocre. I could use a nap. That's how I'm feeling today. But it doesn't mean that I'm not capable of downloading some serious knowledge into your brains, which is what I want to do today. So,
but before that, we have a big announcement. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know what it is.
This is not going to be news to you.
Today is the last day of our current coaching enrollment period. Which means if you want to get some coaching starting in the next few weeks, this is your last day to sign up and be pretty much guaranteed a spot.
No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily guaranteed.
If you're crazy, or if by the time we do this, we've had a ton of people sign up, then no, I can't guarantee you anything.
But especially after today, we really can't.
Don't test me today. Okay? I'm not doing great today, and I'm just going to tell you, no, don't guarantee people jack shit today, okay? I'm saying.
But after today, really game over. We don't know.
No.
After today, all you'll have access to is our wait list. And we can't exactly promise when we will have spots open up for the wait list.
Or if. I'm just
eventually.
I'm just keeping it real, okay? I'm not into making you I'm not into like being nice today. Okay? I'm just into keeping it real.
We can play bad cop, good cop.
I know, you're being too nice. I don't like it.
This is our whole thing.
Okay. So, yeah, today is the last day they're going to be like, why the hell would I want to work with you? You're crazy and clearly you don't even like people. I'm like, no, I do.
Just not today.
Just not today. Oh, come on. We've been on hundreds of episodes. People have their ups and downs. And I promise that if I actually meet you in person, I'll be a lot more delighted to talk to you than it looks like I am today. But, yeah, today is the last day to sign up, which doesn't mean you're like, A, guaranteed a spot, or B, totally 100% committed to doing it. It just means I want to have a serious conversation with you about the prospect of coaching. And we only have about 25 spots. At this point, we're recording this in advance, so I don't know where we're at with that. But we'll absolutely talk to you about it and see if, like, it's a good fit and all of that. And, again, we're not going to be doing this officially until March 2020. Probably later in March, so a good 5-ish
So between
months.
now and then, if you're interested, it's going to be hit or miss. It's going to be join the wait list, and we'll see what we can do. So this enrollment period is us specifically opening up those 20-25 spots to have a whole wave of people coming in at once. Mm-hmm. And after that, no promises.
So the link to sign up, which again, it's just like conversation.
You're not putting any money down. You're just saying,
no.
hi, I'd like to talk to you because I'm really interested in this.
We don't do that because I would never, ever, ever want someone to just like sign up to work with us without having spoken to either of us or without us getting to talk to you. Like the most important thing for success when it comes to coaching or therapy is that like you have a good rapport and relationship with your coach or your therapist or whatever. So we just really want to talk to people first.
Yeah, honestly, whether it's us or a therapist or someone else that you're wanting to work with, this to me is an important part of it. So you should always ask, can we have a conversation first? Because it's a pretty special relationship. You don't want to just hope that it goes well. You want to have you want to determine if there's a rapport.
You want to make sure that our style matches what you want and what you need. And we want to get clear on that. So if you're like, okay, I needed a deadline, I needed an incentive, this is a little bit of a fire under your butt to, take the leap, then I hope that this deadline will serve as that for some of you. Yeah. Okay, we'll remind you about that at the end. And hopefully by the end, because I'm talking about cool things, I'll be in a better mood.
You'll get into it. I know you will.
Whatever. I just don't like pretending. Actually, I love acting. I don't like pretending.
Well, today we've got
I am kind of excited about what we're talking about.
Kind of like a Psych 101 topic.
Which I love Psych 101, so actually I'm kind of excited about this.
I mean, I almost double majored in Psych because I just
Me too.
Loved it so much.
I already had too many things that I was studying. I was like, I can't do all of these things. But we're going to talk about the 4 attachment styles today, which you may have heard of. There's been a lot of, this is a theory that's been kind of percolating since the 50s, so it would be weird if you hadn't heard about it at all.
And I feel like it's had a bit of a resurgence.
I think
recently.
So. Well, at least
people are talking
like
about it more often.
It seems like there has been some sort of a like a percolation in just like the common lexicon or something that people just know about it.
Yeah.
Or maybe so many people have gone to therapy now that therapy is just like kind of like a normal thing that people do. Then that might be why people know about it more now. But the thing is that just because you've heard of the term doesn't necessarily mean you know A, what it is, B, the kind of subtypes, or
how it's showing up in your relationship.
You probably aren't thinking about it that hard. And I would like for you to think about it hard for like 30 or 40 minutes, which is what I want this episode to be about, because Kristen and I are not by any means experts at attachment theory. Like, we're not therapists. Even therapists, I don't know how many of them, some might like really be all about it, some might not. I think just like any theories, there are people who are more into it versus people who are like, I subscribe more to this theory over here. But personally, from what I understand of it, and also what I've just been able to witness and all of the people I've worked with, I think it's a thing. And I think it's a thing that you guys need to know about.
Yes. So we want to get into this today. We'll give you just a really quick little backstory about what this is, and then we'll get into the 4 types, because I know you're probably curious, like, okay, well, I want to know which one I am. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, promise. But like Rachel said, this started back in the 50s with 2 researchers named Bowlby and Ainsworth.
They sound very British.
They do sound very British. They probably were Brits. I don't know.
No, you just made that up. You have no idea.
But Bowlby, and I can just imagine them in their hats in the 50s.
You're only saying that because the bowl and you're thinking of a bowler hat.
And I also just went to go see the Downton movie.
Speaking of bowler hats.
That's very top of mind right now.
Okay.
It's great, by the way.
Okay. So, the theory in and of itself is very simple. It just basically means that the nature to which a child is attached to their parent as they're growing up is how they're going to relate to other people, and it's going to inform the way they attach to and build relationships with other people in adulthood.
It's often talked about in romantic relationships, but these can show up in all of your relationships, with your boss, with your friends, with your coworkers, all of that. So this is pretty widely applicable.
So it explains in my experience, and also according to the theory itself, it explains a lot about why your relationships may be succeeding or failing. I mean, honestly, if your relationship is succeeding, you're not like looking into why, right? So for most of us, you're looking into attachment theory, or you're getting curious about, why do my relationships keep failing? And this might be one of the reasons.
Why do I keep being attracted to the same kinds of people?
Ooh. Why do I keep dating the same guy in a different skin suit? Right?
Yep. And why do my relationships end the way they do? What's with these patterns that I'm having over and over again?
Yeah.
This is going to start to explain why you keep having those recurring experiences.
Yeah. So unlike normal side chats where we have kind of like a riffing conversation, we do actually have notes on a clipboard this time because I didn't want to miss anything important.
Well, and because this is not something that, like Rachel said, we're not experts in this.
No, we want to make sure we hit the big points.
Yes.
And also, I guess I should have mentioned at the beginning of this episode, but it's not too late now. This is a video on YouTube. For those of you who are listening on the podcast, just know that once a month we do side chats on video. And not that there's anything different other than that you can just see us sitting and talking with like makeup on. I was going to say hair done. And I'm like, nope, not today. Didn't care about that today. Clearly I didn't care about a lot of things today. So
but you got the makeup on.
I just wanted to slide that in there, that this is also a video. So if you guys want to either switch on over to YouTube and watch it, or if you want to share with someone who's not into podcasts but they're into YouTube videos, you could just easily share it with them that way. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get into the 4 types of attachment, and basically, like, very generally, what creates it, and kind of the signs and symptoms that you might be having if you're one of these 4.
Yes.
Okay.
So we'll start with secure. We don't
the gold
need to
standard of attachment.
Yeah, this one, if you're having secure relationships, you're probably not like seeking out, why are they so secure? But if you're not, this is probably where you're trying to go to.
This is your pinnacle.
That's why we want to get into what this one looks like. So in this one, you are regularly getting your needs met in the relationship, and you're also meeting the others. There's a good balance of giving and receiving love, giving and receiving affection, and we'll get into what it looks like when that's not balanced, but in secure, we do have a balanced getting needs met.
And the reason that is possible is because that is what you received as a child. Okay?
Correct.
So, like, a lot of people, unless you got that as a child, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to just, like, snap your fingers and do that easily as an adult. Mm-hmm. So, kids who had secure attachment had parents who were very consistent. And very consistent about meeting their needs, about showing up for them, not just physically, but emotionally as well.
And also let them have some independence and also have a safe place to come back to.
Yes.
So they were getting their needs met, but they were also able to sometimes stumble and fall and realize that it was okay and develop that sense of self-reliance while also having a safe home base.
So I think that one of the most important parts about secure attachment is that, and like this is a very fine line to walk, but people as kids were either not over or under parented. Mm-hmm. They were parented to like a really ideal degree, which is why so few people are like naturally securely attached without having like undergone a lot of personal development to get to the place where they can be securely attached, because it's very difficult for people to parent on that line between over and under parenting. And we can talk about what that means when we get into the other types, because that's where under or over parenting are usually coming in. But it's enough support and consistency that the kid always feels secure and safe, that they have a safe space to fall back on and a home base to return to. But the parent isn't like hovering over them anxiously, monitoring their every move. They're allowed to develop a sense of resilience, like physical and emotional, particularly emotional resilience is what happens when you're allowed to fail and you're allowed to get rejected. You're allowed to skin yourself up without your parent like freaking out. Mm-hmm. So it builds a person's strength, their emotional strength and like their strength of character. And that makes it a lot easier for them to then go out into the world as an adult and thrive, because they've had they've had that like strength building experience in childhood and into their adolescence. So the world isn't this like terrifying, overwhelming place because their parent has kind of modeled for them and treated them like, not like an adult, but they've kind of built them up to be able to be a functioning adult in the world.
Right. Which is why people who have this secure attachment style often are fairly confident. They feel pretty competent in terms of comparing themselves to their peers or interacting with their peers. They also recognize that they have shortcomings and they're mostly okay with that. They're not beating themselves up all the time.
They're not internalizing the shortcoming
They're
and
not
being
saying,
like, I'm not good enough,
Exactly.
I'm not worthy. I think they probably have a really good ability to discern the difference between I failed and I'm a failure. They're
Right.
not taking it in. They're able to kind of like be logical and reasonable about their shortcomings.
Right. Like, I'm not that great at that, but I'm still a good person.
Right. Who cares that I'm not great at that?
Exactly.
They're keeping things in perspective.
Which allows them to interact with their peers in a healthier, more confident way because
Right.
they're not constantly saying, oh, I'm worse than that person, or I'm better than that
Yeah.
person.
Mm-hmm.
They're just recognizing, okay, we all bring something to the table, and that's fine.
Another thing that they're really good at is having boundaries. Mm-hmm. They have a good ability to stand up for themselves and communicate in a healthy way and set boundaries if they need to, like say no and put rules in place, and
But not so many boundaries that they're blocked off from the world.
which we'll talk about that type, right? But again, they have healthy boundaries. An unhealthy boundary would be a wall. A healthy boundary is a fence. Like things can you can see through and you can get through. You're not completely walling yourself off from all the like people in the light, right? Like literal sunlight. But there's a border there between you and other people, and you honor those boundaries between you and other people, and you know what they are. Exactly. In the first place. So
we shared a little about the parenting style that helps kids become healthy, secure, attached adults. But like Rachel said before, don't feel like if you didn't have that idyllic parenting childhood experience that there's no way you can ever have this secure attachment.
No.
This is what we can all work toward. This is why this theory is so helpful to understand, because you can see where you are in whichever of these 4 categories, but you're not stuck in that pattern forever. So we're all moving more into this secure place, no matter how you were parented. That is possible.
Yeah, this is what personal development is for.
I don't want you to think this is like a personality type where I'm stuck with this and this is just who I am.
No, I mean, the reason people go to therapy, the reason people work through these issues in coaching or whatever is so that they can grow as a person. And if it weren't possible to grow as a person, why would any of us do that? Like, there would be no point in personal development at all if you weren't allowed to like grow beyond where you started. And so this is very much just where you started. And if you don't work on it, if you're not conscious of it, then it will keep being your default tendency. And so the reason we're so, in everything that we do, we just want to shine a light on the pattern as it is so that you can understand it and see it and then decide to do something about it if you want to. Yes. I would really say that most people who have secure attachment did not come by that naturally. They came by it through having to actually work on it. And were having a ton of experiences in one category that they finally got sick of it and said, okay, I have to take responsibility. I have to do something different. I can't expect people to keep, again, it's the definition of insanity to expect a different result, even though you keep doing the same thing over and over. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I really don't think there's that many naturally securely attached people. Not in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any stats for that, but I haven't seen it very often.
Anecdotally, I'm just going to say I have not seen a lot of that.
No.
So don't be weirded out if you don't relate to that, or if you didn't used to relate to that and now you're starting to relate more to being securely attached.
Yes. So again, we're looking to be 2 healthy, confident people who are caring about our own growth and our own boundaries, but have decided to come together and share vulnerability and intimacy and again, communication in an open way. That's
not just romantic.
No.
Attachment styles get brought up most when it comes to romance, but I think, and we'll talk about this later, I think it's actually under discussed in other types of relationships.
Definitely.
So yes, it's really about your ability to relate well to any person. Mm-hmm. And the more intense the relationship, the more the issues tend to get brought to light.
Sure.
Which is why you tend to see it most in romantic relationships. But I've got a couple examples percolating for later about some really intense situations that people can get themselves into that have nothing to do with romance, but that really bring this crap out.
Yep.
Okay, so the second, I don't think these are in any particular order. There is no order. And there's also no like ranking of, other than secure, which is the gold standard. I think that they're just got different issues, the rest of them.
Yes.
There's not like one that's better or worse, though I guess.
There's one that's
pretty
most
bad.
challenging. We'll just call it that.
Okay, so the second one is anxious.
And as you would expect, the anxious people, the anxious attachment style people are nervous all the time. They're stressed all the time. They have that kind of constant anxiety of, I really, really want to get close to this person. And I'm also really scared that they're going to leave or that they don't feel the same way that I feel. Yeah. And so they're just constantly on edge trying to evaluate that. They're
in constant need of affection and reassurance. Like, they're that crazy person who calls you like 30 times when you don't answer the phone. And I don't mean to say that you're actually crazy if you've done something like that, because I have definitely done that when I was much, much younger. So there you go. I definitely used to have some anxious attachment style that I would never in a million years be caught dead doing that now. But yeah, when you're like 19 and you have no idea what you're doing, then hell yeah, I had some anxious attachment going on.
If you look back at how you related to your friends and romantic partners and all that as a teenager, when it's like the most intense, you'll probably be able to pretty quickly figure out what your style is, even if you've done a lot of work on that.
So these people are often never single because they're so afraid of being alone, and they need that constant reassurance. So they're just kind of like often bouncing from relationship to relationship to relationship.
Which means that they will often succumb to unhealthy relationships. They'll rationalize that. They'll say, as long as I have someone, it's better than no one. So even if that person's not treating them very well, they'll often stick around because they just really, really, and they hope maybe I can convince them to like me as much as I like them. So remember how we talked about insecure, how balanced that felt? All of a sudden, the balance has dropped substantially.
Yeah. You have a lot less power when you're the anxious person.
Yes.
Because you're just constantly like pleading for the other person to give you often the scraps of their attention. And we'll talk about later why anxious people often attract avoidant people. And so it creates this really terrible, like, the more you grasp on, the more they want to run away, and then the more you want to latch on. And so it creates this terrible, like, codependency. Is what that creates.
Yes. So the anxious style, it's interesting because what they want more than anything is closeness. And yet, because they're so anxious about, do you feel the way I feel? Or do you want the same things I want? They will often be kind of suspicious or not trusting. And so they might be questioning all the time, or they might be, where were you? Who were you talking to? Because they're so concerned, and they're trying to get that validation.
Am I wanted?
Yes, I do want you as much. And so they're seeking for signs all the time that you don't. And so they actually end up pushing people away with their suspicion and their lack of trust, and their kind of maybe a little bit of snooping even.
Okay, so how does this come about? How does someone become anxiously attached to their parents? I would say, I think a psychologist could potentially parse, like, split hairs on this, but I'm going to say I think it's a couple of major things. One is that you received love and affection and got your needs met in a rather inconsistent way. So it's like, in some ways, your parents were reliable, or the people who were raising you, often it's not necessarily your parents, you could count on, and in other ways, you couldn't. And so sometimes, like, so if you grew up in an emotionally volatile situation where maybe you had a parent and you never really knew what was going to set them off, like you never knew maybe when they would get angry or not angry, or sometimes they would be super loving and then sometimes they might be withdrawn. Maybe you had a depressed parent, right, who couldn't always emotionally show up for you. Then you weren't getting reassurance and love and feeling like you were being validated for your worth on a frequent, very predictable schedule. And what that creates almost in your mind is like what we would call a gambling schedule in psychology, which is that slot machine. You don't know when you're going to hit it. And so this often creates people pleasing. because you never know when you're going to get the next hit of reassurance. And so you're constantly, you constantly feel a little bit unstable and like you got to keep going for that next hit because you don't know when you're going to get it.
You feel like you have to do something to get that.
Yes.
Because sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't.
It's not a given.
I'm
right?
constantly managing my behavior, trying to get that hit of validation or reassurance.
Yeah.
And then that translates into all kinds of adult relationships as well, where you will turn yourself into a pretzel to try to get even a scrap of validation or confirmation that somebody cares about you. Mm-hmm. So you can see why this is born out of that kind of parenting style. And you can see why that would create a lot of anxiety in a kid.
And so here's the thing. I think that parents who end up creating an anxiously attached kid, most of them don't mean to, right? Like, no one's meaning to do this. But I think that over-parenting and under-parenting can both equally create an anxiously attached person, a child. Because again, and the reason I think someone might split hairs about this is technically the definition is you didn't receive love and affection in a very consistent way. But I believe that if you've received a ton of over-parenting, which some people would say, well, how can there really be such a thing as over-parenting if you're constantly present, right? And you're constantly giving love and attention or whatever, then how do you even create an anxious kid? And my thing is that just because you're sometimes over-parenting might not actually mean that you're consistently giving your kid what they actually need, which is love and acceptance and feelings of worthiness. So you might be like overprotecting them from certain failures or rejections and therefore not helping them build resilience of any kind. And so then they go out into the world and they're super fretful because they've never had to fend for themselves, instead of being like, if you fail, I will still love you. Like, your worthiness isn't in question if you fail. And so sometimes I think if a parent doesn't demonstrate to their kid that they are lovable no matter what, and that they're allowed to go out there and fail and come back, often a parent accidentally sends the message, if not intending to, that, you know, if you fail, that's going to bring shame upon you and maybe the family and that kind of thing. Know what I'm saying?
Definitely. Because being present and being very involved doesn't necessarily mean that you are consistently giving that positive reinforcement.
Yes.
And
right.
So you can see how that could turn into an anxious child whose parent is very, very involved, but they never know if they're going to get a good comment or a bad comment.
Right, exactly. You might have a super involved parent who doesn't actually understand that what their kid needs is validation of their worth, not of their behavior, not of like, you did a good thing, but you are a good person. And even when you do things that might not be good, you're still a good person and you're still lovable. A lot of people don't know how to do that for children because no one did it for them. Right. They don't feel like they're unconditionally lovable, and so they have a hard time being able to treat anyone else like that. Even when they think they're doing it, they might be sending the inadvertent message that, no, your worth relies more on your behavior and what you're doing rather than who you're being. And that creates a ton of anxiety in a person and the constant need to then prove themselves.
Yep.
And then, you know, stay close to people who they think that they can get any reassurance from. If they didn't get it from their parents, they're going to go seek it from someone else.
And the way they relate to other people is they often have a much higher opinion of others.
Yeah.
And a much worse opinion of themselves. They don't trust that they are inherently lovable or inherently worthy, and they assume these other people have better qualities than me, so let me try to do what I can to make those better people like little old me. And there's a lot of insecurity that comes with that kind of approach to relationships, and you automatically feel imbalanced right off the bat.
Okay, so let's go to avoidant. These are the people who are your classic, emotionally unavailable, very independent, very uncomfortable with intimacy, always got their eye on the escape route. Like, how can I get out of this? They've always got one foot out the door.
Yeah, these are commitment phobes. They can't stay in something for way too long because at a certain point, there's going to be some vulnerability that has to happen, and they are not willing to go there.
Yep.
So they always keep people at a distance. They've got their arm out, being like, you can get this close, but no closer. And if you try, I'm out. So you know these people, they feel like they have a wall up. It feels like you can't ever really get inside. And they're doing that on purpose. They're doing that from a protective standpoint.
So these are the way this happens in a person is similar to what happens in, an anxious person. They got certain needs met, but other needs were neglected. So maybe you got, your basic needs cared for, your food and your shelter and all of that, but maybe you weren't held enough or cuddled enough or touched enough as a kid. And so there's this constant, I can't rely on anyone else. I have to kind of
fend for yourself.
I gotta fend for myself. The message I received is that I have to fend for myself.
And so trusting people is very scary to them because they've learned to rely on themselves, and other people tend to let them down, is their view on life. So don't let anybody in because they're just going to disappoint you anyway. They're just going to hurt you.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this. I think you could have two kids in the same family who one ends up anxious, one ends up avoidant, same exact parenting style.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think that your reaction to what is or isn't happening as you're growing up has a lot to do with your innate personality and wiring. And so it's not like if you parent like this, you will always produce an anxious person versus an avoidant person. That's not necessarily the case. It has a lot to do also with the kid in question.
Yeah, it's more nuanced. It's just never that clean cut.
Yeah.
So these avoidant type people, they have the reverse view on other people and relationships than the anxious people. They have a higher view of themselves because they have learned to be very self-reliant, and they know they can trust themselves. They'll always be there for themselves.
Yeah.
But they're not so sure about other people. They're not so sure they can rely on other people or trust other people. So they're kind of going in being like, what do you got to offer? Impress me. And if you can't, I'm out. So you can see we've got the reverse here. And there's a reason why people say in relationships, opposite attract. Because in this case, that tends to be very true.
Right. So anxious and avoidant people, you see this pattern all the time. And it's funny because you would think that avoidant people wouldn't attract anxious people because you would think it would be like their worst idea, right? Of why would I want someone who's constantly in need of reassurance? Like someone who ends up being clingy, that's the worst thing that someone who's avoidant would want. But the reason they attract each other is because they're on the same level. They might seem very different, but they actually are perfect, opposite match for each other.
Well, think about this. If you're an avoidant person and you try to put your hand up and push someone away, if that's a secure person, they're going to say, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not interested. I'll go find someone who's interested.
I don't want emotionally available people. I'm grossed out by that. Bye-bye.
So that person's not going to stay in a relationship for very long with that avoidant person because they're going to say, I'm going to go get my needs met by someone who is capable of giving me what I need. But an anxious person will see that hand up and will say, oh, no, I'm going to break through that barrier.
Right.
I need them to need me.
Right. I see that as an invitation, as a challenge almost.
So often some of the only people who are comfortable, who will stick around with an avoidant person is an anxious person who's trying to convince themselves, I can get even that person to like me. And the reverse is true too. So a securely attached person, soon as that anxious person starts to get way too involved and way too needy, they're going to be like, no, I'm not interested. So you can see how there are times where a securely attached person can be like, okay, you need some space. I get it. Go have your space. Or you need a luxury validation. Okay, I'm here. I care. But if it gets too far, they're going to be like, this is not it. So the most extremes tend to find each other.
So again, that's why it creates this really unhealthy pattern of the anxious person is doing a lot of the clinging and the chasing, and the avoidant person is doing a lot of the running away and rationalizing and having one foot out the door and keeping people at an arm's distance. And I think the thing is it's not that avoidant people do want, I think they do want love, which is part
Everyone wants love.
And affection. So it's on one hand, they want to be able to receive it, but they also don't. And so that's why they end up attracting people, because they want a relationship, but they're attracting people who are on the same level of unhealthy as they are.
Yep.
Because healthy people don't really attract super unhealthy people. That's not how the universe works.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really healthy, the unhealthy people are just going to bounce right off of you.
Yep.
But if you're at a certain level of unhealth, I know that's not really a word, but it makes sense in this context, you're going to attract people on that same level.
Yep.
So, okay.
There's one more type, and this one starts to get a little complicated because essentially it's a mashup of the avoidant and the anxious.
The fourth type is called
anxious-avoidant.
Anxious-avoidant. Dash-avoidant. Anxious-avoidant.
Which you're probably like, how is that even possible? These seem so opposite. How could they exist in one person? And you're right, it is a little bit messy.
But I think you've seen this person.
Yeah.
I think and like everyone has known at least one anxious-avoidant person who is someone who has this very like confounding mix of both of those things. So like they can both deeply desire intimacy or vulnerability
and
or
kind
a
of
relationship.
throw themselves into it.
And then
freak out and run away.
So, like, also, you'll see people who will lash out at people. Like, they'll be like, I want someone to be close to, but then they'll, like, attack that person.
Yep.
Because it's like a little feral cat. That's kind of how I see that, right? Like, they want, technically, like, love and affection, but then they don't trust it, so they're like, at you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. These are people who you're going to see them in very, very intense relationships that explode.
Often abusive and dysfunctional.
Yes.
Let's just put it that way.
Right. On again, off again. There's a deep level of dysfunction because they're not stable or consistent. At least if you're anxious or avoidant, you're kind of consistent in what you want.
Yeah.
In this one, you can't even maintain that level of consistency
kind
because
of all over the place.
You don't even really know what you want.
Mm-hmm. So this type has, according to my research, they're most prone to mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And I think that's directly related to the fact that what usually develops an anxious avoidant person is legit abuse. Like,
or complete negligence.
They grew up, well, that is abusive.
Yeah, it is.
Right? So they grew up in some form of abusive situation. So they had alcoholic parents, they had drug addicted parents.
They might have been physically abused.
They had rageaholic parents, whatever. They had an very unhealthy dynamic that they grew up around, and so because of that, it makes sense that they're kind of all over the place and that they're a little bit more susceptible to the same things that end up perpetuating the cycle: substance abuse and like mental health issues, all of that. It just makes sense. So
they don't know how to relate to other people well because they didn't have any good models. They only had destructive models.
Yeah.
Or non-existent models.
Yeah.
And so them trying to forge these relationships, they don't know how to handle all of their many fears coming together at once. Fear of intimacy, but also fear of being alone. And they, from moment to moment, can want something different. And it's very chaotic for the person, and it's also chaotic for the people trying to have a relationship with that person.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit. Let's put all this together, okay? So all of this is on a spectrum, by the way, and you are not one thing, okay? No one is 100% securely attached.
No.
Even the most evolved people have 10% maybe of anxious, tendency. And that's normal. So it's okay if you're like, I feel like I'm a little bit of that, but I don't feel like I'm the worst. That's totally normal. And you can grow out of you can work on these things. You can grow out of this. You can start, 75% anxious attached and become 75% secure attached over time.
In
That's
fact,
totally
there
possible.
are some quizzes that you can take online. I've seen a few. I don't know if there is a official one or not.
Yeah.
But when I was poking around, I found some that you can take and kind of just get a general sense. You might already just know from the way we describe this. You might say, oh yeah, I see myself in that. But if you want a little bit more depth about where on those spectrums you are, there's some ways of measuring that.
So I want to say, I feel like we've already kind of alluded to this, but I think it's really important. So I want to say, most of the time, people are doing the very best they can with the resources that they have. And so even if you're like, but I had good parents, why am I so anxious? Or why am I so avoidant? Often it's not that your parents they were trying very hard to meet all of your needs. It's just that they may not have understood what your needs actually were. And usually the reason that might be is because they don't understand their own needs, because they didn't get all of their needs met when they were children. And so it's very hard for someone who's not really securely attached to raise someone who is securely attached. So your issues are going to mirror the issues that your parents brought into, you know, the household and the situation while you were growing up. So if your mom was anxious and your dad was avoidant, likely you're going to be one or the other, or maybe a mix of both, because that's what was modeled to you, and they couldn't have given you what they didn't have. And so that's why there's so many issues, is because unless someone really works to heal this before they pass it on, they're going to pass it on.
Right. And even if your parents had every intention of bringing that secure, stable love and affection, kids interpret things all kinds of ways. So your way of trying to say, hey, I'm here and I care, so I'm going to make sure that you're doing your homework, might be them interpreting that as, I'm not good enough because I didn't do my homework one day.
Right.
And so there's just, if you are a parent and you're watching this, I'm imagining some parents are like, oh my God, what am I doing to my kids?
Well, you're going to screw them up because everyone does, so that's fine.
Everyone does. So don't overthink just to the point that you are super anxious about your own parenting, because kids interpret things however they're going to. But if you didn't receive this as a kid, you can come and reparent yourself a bit and say, I didn't get what I needed from my parents, as well-intentioned as they were, so I'm going to give myself what I didn't get so that I can become a more securely attached adult through my own intention now.
So I want to give you a few examples and stories of how this can show up in other ways beyond just romantic relationships. I don't think I need to give you any examples of how this shows up in romantic relationships, because
you've got your own, you know.
You understand, because you've been there, I've been there, we've all been there. So I don't think you need that. But I think this can show up in some really interesting contexts outside of romantic relationships. Mm-hmm. So I see this a lot between people and the dynamic they have with their boss.
Yeah. Because
again, the boss is similar to a parent in that it's an authority figure who you're often needing validation and support from, and ideally you would like to have affection. You know, or maybe they can't love you unconditionally, but you would still like for them to like you and for them to show affection and support for you.
And be proud of what you do.
Yeah. So a lot of the time I see people come to coaching, and the way they talk about their boss is so reminiscent of how I feel like they will talk about their parents when prodded. Like, it's so similar. Like, you know, an anxious type of person might be like, I feel like my boss doesn't like me. I never really know what she's going to say. I feel like I'm trying so hard to stay late, and I really don't know what she wants. And it's just this constantly like worrying, what does she think of me? What does she think of me? Or am I doing a good job? I don't know. The constant need for reassurance instead of trusting that my work is good. It's okay if my boss doesn't always see that or agree with that. I'm confident in enough myself. No, you're not if you're anxiously attached. You're not really confident, you know, standing on your own 2 feet. So that need for constant validation or reassurance from your boss or the people you work with, that's a real sign that you might have some anxious attachment that you're projecting all over your boss.
Mm-hmm. I've seen this with people's siblings as well. So I've had a client in the past who had a really interesting dynamic with her older sister, where she really admired her and really, really wanted her to be proud of what she was doing. And she would always say things like, well, I don't think my sister would really, really get this. But then also when she would get that, she would think her sister was being condescending. So there was this like anxious-avoidant thing going on where she really, really wanted that. And as soon as she got it, she'd be like, oh, she's being such a like condescending
Right. She
jerk.
could never get it in the way she wanted it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they were so close and had a lot in common, and probably had some little bit of competitiveness growing up where they were competing for
that their parents may have fostered.
Competing for validation from parents. And so now that has continued into adulthood, and there's this anxious-avoidant attachment with a sibling, which is totally possible.
Going back to the boss thing, I think a lot of you might have an avoidant boss. Who's just like never like giving you anything, right?
Yeah.
And so
it might make you feel like you're the anxious one
that's
trying to get something out of them.
Right. It might heighten the anxiety even more because they're just a stone wall and you just can't get anything out of them, and it just frustrates the crap out of you.
Or if you have a super micromanaging boss, then you might turn into the avoidant one, being like, just get off me. Oh my gosh, leave me alone.
Or like a colleague who wants to be best friends with you.
Yeah.
And okay, first of all, that does not make you avoidant if you don't like the colleague and you're like, oh my god.
No, you just not like people.
That's fine. You're allowed to just not like people. But you might have an avoidance if you feel like you have a really, really hard time making friends, and like every time you go somewhere new or you work somewhere new, it feels like you both want and don't want people to come close to you.
Yeah.
I think that can be really challenging. And it can show up, again, more than just in romantic relationships. So, like, what is the pattern if I start a new job or if I'm trying to make friends? Is it like I want to let people in, but I'm really scared of letting them in? There might be some avoidance happening there. Mm-hmm. And then one really just, like, mind-blowing, I think, example that I came to with one of my clients very recently was that I realized, and it helped explain this to her, and it just very much completely changed her whole perspective, was that she was anxious-avoidantly attached to God, or to her idea of whatever you want to call it, God, the universe, spirit, I don't care what you call it, her higher power. And she very much grew up in a religious household. She definitely grew up in a verbally abusive household, and she would tell you that absolutely she was not getting a lot of needs met from her parents. And because of that, her idea of religion was very much warped by her parents' idea of religion, which was like kind of an angry, vengeful, like fundamentalist type of God situation where, you couldn't trust God to support you. You couldn't trust things to work out. God was going to be angry with you if you ever,
disobeyed
sinned or disobeyed. Bad. And so she very much, at the same time, she projected, I think, the issues that she had with her parents, specifically her dad, onto her concept of God, which she actually wanted to have a relationship with something higher than herself. But what we realized was that she was doing this anxious avoidant dance with her idea of literally God. So she wanted to be close, and she wanted to be able to like feel supported and guided by something bigger than herself, but she didn't trust it to show up for her. So she would completely like not play. She would not partake in any sort of thoughts or experiments when it came to like interacting with something bigger than herself. It was like, nope, I'm gonna shut it down because I don't trust that it's actually gonna show up for me, even though I really want it. Totally anxious avoidant relationship with God itself, which I thought was mind-blowing, but also it just shows you how far
everything
the projection can go. Like, if this is your pattern, then you will literally project it onto things that aren't people. You will project it onto non-entities. Your relationship with your higher power, you will even do that with. So, she wanted like what she wanted. Her ideal, when I asked her to describe what she wanted her relationship with her higher power to be, it was like, well, I want them to like make sure I never suffer and to always like swoop in and save me from suffering and make sure that nothing ever goes wrong for me. And like, if it does, then like clearly he doesn't exist. God doesn't exist. And I was like, oh, that's some real anxiety right there. Right. That's like wanting God to overparent you because you were underparented as a kid.
If every challenge means God has abandoned you, then that would be very anxiety inducing. Instead of recognizing maybe challenges are the exact thing that I need right now to become a stronger, more resilient person. Just like a parent would say, okay, my kid needs to learn sometimes. They're going to get some skinned knees. They're going to have some falls, and they're going to recognize I can handle this.
What if the universe were the ultimate good parent? Was what I told her. And maybe you don't maybe your notion of what good parenting is needs to be updated because you didn't really receive it when you were a kid. And so that really, really, really turned her whole perspective around, and to the point where she was open to playing with the idea because she realized, oh, if things don't work out for me, it doesn't mean that like God doesn't exist or doesn't support me. It just means, oh, I'm being supported in a normal way, in a way that's like, okay, I can trust that things will work out even when I'm having hard times. And that sometimes, again, hard times can be necessary to building my character or to helping me get where I really want to go.
Yeah, so a really interesting question to ask yourself is, what would a secure attachment with God look like? or with the universe, or with spirit,
or with my boss, or with
my boss.
Right, like we can take anything and put it in here.
Or with my friends. Maybe you feel like, oh, when I don't hear from certain friends in a certain number of days, they obviously hate me, or they obviously are, you get into this anxious state, even just with your friends. This is the way you relate to some people is probably on some level how you're relating to everyone. It's just certain relationships are more intense, and so it shows up in a bigger way.
Because this pattern was cemented without context. Like, how your brain is wired is how your brain is wired. And you don't have a different wiring for friends than you have for romantic relationships, than you have for God, than you have for your boss. Mm-hmm. Like, relationships are all relationships. And you might have worse issues with certain types of relationships, but you can't be completely secure, I think, with one type of relationship and completely anxious with another type of relationship. I think that those issues are going to show up to some degree in all of your relationships and deserve to be looked at. So obviously we can't get into like, okay, now let's heal you from all of that and get over it, because that is quite a process. Right now, I wanted you to be aware of the 4 types, be able to maybe identify where you're at, not only which ones you're at, but maybe where you think you might be on the spectrum, because I think that's helpful to understand too. Like, I feel like I'm like 50% avoidant, 50% secure. Okay, great. Let's work on making that 75-25 instead. And so because of that, I think that for each person, the formula for getting them to securely attached is a little bit different.
It is, yeah.
But I will say, like, baseline, the most important thing that we have to do is, and I will link to the episode that we previously had about this. I forget the exact title, but I will put it in the episode description. The episode we had about learning how to parent yourself. Because we can't go back in time and change the fact that we received the model that we did.
And you're not stuck in the model based on the way you were raised, because you have this ability now as an adult human to reparent that inner child that's still there, that still wants the love and affection that it didn't receive on a consistent basis. But now you have the ability to meet that need of your own, which is crucial before you can be able to engage in healthy relationships and securely attached relationships as an adult. So it has a lot to do with what are my fears, what are my needs, and how have I been looking outside of myself to get them met when I first and foremost should have been looking within myself.
Right. I need to figure out what fears are driving me so that I can stop the pattern. I need to figure out what I want, what I value, separate from what I think other people want from me or whatever, so that, again, I can get clear on how to make good decisions for myself. That's how we start overcoming any type of unhealthy attachment style.
Yep.
So this was a lot, I know. And I also know that it was also like not enough in that I'm not helping you get over it right now, because that would take months and months, of time.
On an individual basis.
On an individual level. Right. Like, it's something that deserves that much attention.
But until you were at least even aware of your style, there's nothing you can do. So we want to first shine a big spotlight on how have I been relating to other people. And then there's a lot of ways of doing the work to get to that more securely attached style.
Right. So what I hope is that you guys will start to pause before you jump into a new relationship, before you quit your job because you hate your boss, before you break up with all of your friends, who knows, maybe they deserve to be broken up with. But before you burn everything down and start over, question, am I going to be taking the same pattern with me to the next boss, to the next relationship? Do I really want to be that person who keeps dating the same person in a different skin suit? Like, I don't think you do. It
might feel like it's situational, but if you've been having the same kind of situation over and over again, there's a common denominator here, and it's you, and it's your fears, and it's your attachment style, and that is changeable. But without trying to do the inner work, you're going to keep repeating the pattern.
So, okay, with that said, good time to remind you that this, if you choose to do it, you can do this work in coaching. We don't I don't even need to know what your attachment style is. It'll be very obvious to me once we start talking. But it's not even something that we're like, I'm actively like talking about or working through with people necessarily. It's like a natural byproduct of doing a lot of the inner work is you become more securely attached. And of course, we will talk about it sometimes if it's like directly relevant.
Sure. But the first stage that we take all of our coaching clients through is deeply examining and working through their oldest and most problematic fears. And so those are going to be what is driving your attachment style, what your deepest fears are. So we start there before we get into anything else, because that is the thing that is preventing you from having the kind of relationships that you want, from having the kind of career that lights you up, from being able to do things in the world that really align with who you are. Maybe it's people pleasing, maybe it's staying in a job that's just okay but not great. All of this gets down to your fears and your beliefs about what's possible, and we start there. And there's a whole lot more that we get into too, but that's where we have to begin.
I just had a thought. People also have bad attachment styles to money.
Oh yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
You see they're like, oh my god, I can never have enough. I need all of the reassurance through making all the money. You know.
Or just don't look at it, I just don't deal with it.
Put my head in the sand, right? Like you see it showing up with that too. So again, it's this shit is pervasive. Everywhere. Okay, so if this is work you're interested in doing, not just this, but so much more than this, basically becoming the kind of person who is healthy and confident and capable of getting the things that they want, and then maybe more importantly, being clear about the things that they want so that they can on their own recognize what those things are and then pursue them in a healthy way. That's what coaching is for. So today's the last day. If you want to fill out that form and talk to us, we will be happy to see if it's a good fit. And link in episode description. And we'll see you on Tuesday with a blog of some kind. Whose it is, but... That's it. Okay. I hope that I'm not as annoying as I was at the beginning of this.
Are you feeling better?
Yeah.
Yeah, you seem better.
I still really want to take a nap, which I think is fine.
Nothing wrong with that on a cloudy Monday afternoon.
Okay. See you guys later.
See you Tuesday.
Bye.